So thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. As Lawless said, my name is Kerry Lawless. Am I shorter than everyone else, or could the mic come down a little bit? Please. Thank you. When I was young, I was tall. In the 70s and 80s, I was tall for a female. I just want that noted on the record. We didn't get as well fed as people are now. Okay. So yes, as I talk through, does it come up? Oh, did she? Thanks. Thank you very much. As I said, low tech. Okay. So as I go through it, I think a lot of people are going to recognize the experience that I've had from when I first got sick, looking for a diagnosis, looking for treatment, looking to try to get well, accepting maybe that I was never going to get well or go back to being the person that I was, and then trying to find a way of making peace with that and living the best life that I could. Symptoms and all, chronic pain and all. So I'd like to talk about that and then to bring it back to maybe the type of things that I would like to see changing. And I'm drawing that on my own experience, but what other people have said to me about what we'd like to see change. And it's the yellow Post-its are where people have pointed out similar things. So I think we're all sort of on the same page about the sorts of change we'd like to see to make life better for patients and to make life better for healthcare practitioners, because we are difficult to treat and we are difficult to care for. And so anything we can do working together that makes life easier for patients, for healthcare professionals, I think is a good thing to pursue. Okay, just to provide a little bit of context. That was the old me. So in my pretty misspent youth, in the mid-1980s, when Ireland was going through a recession, I buggered off and I went to Crete. And I spent 4 years on and off in Crete, and then going to Holland to work and make some money, to go back to Crete, and going to London to work and make some money and go back to Crete, and had a glorious time when I probably should have been studying. And one of the jobs I did, I was a tour guide for the Samaria Gorge. Okay, it's 17 kilometers from the White Mountains, which run as a spine along the middle of Crete. Really steep incline, and then leads you to the sea in a small place called Ayurvameli. I used to do that twice a week. On my days off, I used to climb other mountains because that's what I like to do. Okay, so we've got one picture of me in Australia climbing, the middle one, the Samaria Gorge. That one's inside in one of the Canary Islands. Okay, I was climbing in heels, but I was still climbing. Okay, so that's just to give the context of what something, in my case, secondary fibromyalgia, does to a person, and how it changes, in a way, those things you used to be or how you used to see yourself, the hobbies you had, the interests you had, how you spent your free time. Okay. Now this is what happened when I got sick. So in 2007, late August, I woke up one day and I was sick. Really, really sick. I'd been feeling a bit off the night before, but I woke up and I could not move. Couldn't lift my head off the pillow. It was difficult getting up and getting to the bathroom. Everything hurt, everything. I was dizzy, I was nauseous, Everything was just difficult. So you think I've got a virus, I've got summer flu. So you take 3 days off work, but it doesn't go away. So you take 3 weeks off work, and it doesn't go away. And then that becomes 3 months. The test showed nothing. I didn't need antibiotics because it seemed to be viral. I have a very good and sympathetic GP, and he did refer me everywhere, and he did send me for every test. But the best we could come up with was some sort of post-viral syndrome. Okay, came up that I'd had glandular fever, but the testing that we do in Ireland, it was impossible to say, was that a childhood bout with glandular fever, or was that something more recent? Okay. Went back to work, was out of work, was in work, was out work, took work home. Okay. Wasn't dealt with very nicely by my employer because they just didn't understand how could anyone be that sick for so long and not have a name for what was going on. How could I talk on the phone one day and not be able to answer a phone call the next day because I was so sick? How could I manage to do a bit of work at home this week, but the next week be completely incapable? Now, at that time in 2019, when sort of my employer's patients had really come to an end, and my sick leave had nearly come to an end, I was visibly sick, okay? I didn't realize how lucky I was at that stage to still look visibly sick. So at least my colleagues and people could go, you can see she's dragged herself in. You can see she shouldn't be here. Luckily, I was unionized, and at least I got a redundancy. So after working for 20 years, I left school at 16, went back in my 30s, did all the certificate courses, the diploma courses, the part-time study, ended up with my master's eventually, ended up with my dream job, and then had to leave in my early 40s. Okay? The redundancy lasted about 2 years. I eked it out together with social welfare. But in the end, as a lot of people will know, it goes together with your savings, together with every other reserve, okay? Because once you're over the shock and you're trying to find out what's wrong with you and get better, you end up in the treatment maze. So my first diagnosis was ME, okay? Because at this stage, the fibromyalgia symptoms weren't as strong as maybe the fatigue and the fog. I didn't have that element of pain everywhere yet. That came later. So I went around, and as is the case, you follow each symptom down, and you go to see as many consultants as you can. I went to as many alternative practitioners as I could. I tried anything and everything. I had holy water thrown at me. I drank sage. I took everything I could to get well. And then within the public health system, and indeed the private health system, because at that stage I still had money, that I was able to access both, I looked for answers. And all I seemed to end up with was a growing collection of diagnoses. So I had my ME diagnosis, my POTS diagnosis, my chronic pain diagnosis, my chronic migraine, my vertigo, and eventually a fibromyalgia diagnosis. Privately, I accessed a very good and sympathetic rheumatologist, and he did his very best in terms of managing the pain, explaining the phenomenon to me. He introduced me to pacing. He introduced me to the idea of cognitive behavior therapy to help me with pacing, to help me to adapt to my new reality. Now, in my case, I went on to get a diagnosis of Lyme disease, and that fit my particular range of symptoms better. I still believe fibromyalgia is in there, but I believe it's secondary fibromyalgia, as Andrea was talking about, because when a tick bites you, it's not just bacteria they spread a host of viruses as well. So it's my belief that when I originally got sick, it was Lyme disease, and eventually the viruses I picked up worked their way around to my joints, and I developed fibromyalgia as well. And the thing about the maze is you go around and round and you spend more time and more money. And as your money dwindles, your sort of family's belief in you dwindles a bit, and your friends start to look at you sideways. Like, I thought it was this fibromyalgia you had. Why are you talking about brain fog? I thought it was this, is that not like rheumatism? So why'd you keep falling over? Oh, well, I have vertigo as well, because you see that, and you're going through the explanations and you're trying to do this, and you can see people's faces changing. And then for me, it just got tiring. I'm like, I don't have all the answers. I don't even know there are all answers. But I'm not going to be justifying myself and excusing myself and sort of almost apologizing for the fact that I don't feel well. And that was the hardest thing for me. The being sick sucks. It absolutely does, okay? But the other thing of particularly the relationships with family and friends, that sucks more. And at the same time as you're going around this maze of healthcare professionals, you're trying to deal with an employer, you're trying to deal with social welfare. I had mortgage income protection. They really don't like to pay. And when you have an invisible illness or a contested illness, they really, really don't like to pay. It took me 2 years. I got it, and I got it all backdated. But can you imagine the stress and strain that put on me? And can you imagine the stress and strain that put on me trying to cope with fibromyalgia and the other diagnosis? So you do this, and then you find your cheese, and you think you've come to the end of your maze, and, you're 4 or 5 years in my case, you're still hopeful that, something's going to come up, and this is all going to be just a bad period of your life. And very lucky that I had bought a house before I got sick. Very lucky that I did manage to get my mortgage protection through. Okay? You're doing this and you settle down, and then all of a sudden the maze changes. The assessment criteria changes. The consultant who was sympathetic to you moves on. The physiotherapist who was great with you leaves that particular post and transfers out. In my case, weren't replaced. So the area that I'm living in northwest Dublin, I think we're down 3 physiotherapists at the moment. So you can imagine the workload and the stress and the pressures that they're under. You get sent for assessments for your insurance, your mortgage protection, your occupational therapist in work. But they're assessing you for the wrong things. I was very fit. Okay, I was about 5 stone lighter than I am now. Okay, never skinny, but I was very athletic. I used to do long distance running. I used to do mountain climbing. I used to do wall climbing. You put me on a typical stress machine and get me to walk, that's not going to bother me. I always had a low blood pressure, low heart rate, a healthy one. So they would get me to do this test and then say the test is fine. In fact, you're doing good. because they were testing the wrong thing. So I was in a hospital, which will remain nameless. I'd been taken in as an inpatient and was given a series of tests, and I could see where this was going. And the more I tried to explain, look, that's not what's difficult for me. You know, I have this background, I have still disability, and even if I feel dreadful, I can still keep going on this machine. So what I did, while I was hooked up to the heart monitors and the blood pressure monitors and everything else, I went down a quiet corner and I mimed hanging washing. I went round that corner on my own, like a lunatic, in the hospital. All the machines took it up. And I mimed bending down to a basket and putting my arms above my head and pegging washing to the line. And then I mimed washing the side of the bath. Everything dropped. Everything spiked. I made it back to the bed and everybody rushed around me. And everything was off the charts and everyone was worried. And I'm sitting there with this happy smile on my face, doing a Spike Milligan. I told you I was sick. Right? So why do we keep assessing the wrong things? You know? Why don't we listen to patients when we say, this is what causes my blood pressure to drop. This is what brings on my vertigo. This is what, if I do today, I'll get a flare tomorrow. Why don't they listen to the patients who say, the physical pain I can deal with, it's the mental exhaustion afterwards. Or I find emotionally charged family events where I'm trying to mask and I'm trying to be the old me. I get such a flare from that because the energy that goes into the pretending and the hiding your pain and you're battling with brain fog, but you've developed some strategies to try to disguise it. But that never really gets measured or asked. Or when you go to an assessment and you can do something on Monday, to quote something Rachel and I were talking about over the weekend, it doesn't mean you can do those same things on a Tuesday. The assessments don't seem to take into account the unpredictability of this disease. So you find yourself back at another maze. But hopefully, as in my case, I found myself there with other people because I'd found patient groups and I'd found peer support and I'd found people who'd been sicker than I was for longer than I was, and they were willing to share what they knew about it. And all of a sudden we had some roadmaps and we were able to help each other before you had the interview with the doctor from social welfare or your employer or whatever you had to do. We were able to help each other to fill in the forms. Because at a time in your life when you're as sick as you've ever been, you have all these other pressures coming in. And it's something else that's not always recognized. Like I know for half of the time that I've been sick, I was able to afford private care. I was able to go to physio privately every week. And I know the good that that did me. And I know how much harder it's been for me since. And there's no recognition, really, of chronic illness in this country, in that we have such a two-tier, unequal system. And even within the public system, because of the under-resourcing within it, you can't guarantee that you'll get the same level of care and support in one area as another. And I think that's something I'm hoping, even though it's not health directly, it impacts on our health in terms of our social care. So just the last slide I had then. This is me trying to summarize. It's a lot of what other people have said today. It's a lot of what other... I like the idea of calling us people rather than patients as well. Sort of people who have got different chronic conditions. I think some of what we want is new ways of thinking. Like, we know this is a difficult disease. We know it's hard to treat and hard to manage. And I think we'd prefer if the healthcare professionals who are treating us told us that sometimes they're stumped, or sometimes all they can do is help us manage the system, or sometimes all they can do is say, look, this and this and this has helped other people. It might work for you. You know, and I've come across a lot of really good healthcare professionals who've done that with me, and it's made a huge amount of difference. I've also had the other side of the experience, you know, where I need to lose some weight. You don't say. I hadn't noticed, actually. You know, of course I need to lose some weight, right? I'm 54. I can't take HRT. I can't walk very far. I can't afford a gym membership. I move as much as I can, okay? And I'm hoping that that'll get better and better, because of course some of the weight needs to come down. But the problem existed before the weight. The weight is making it worse. 100% agree with any doctor or any other healthcare professional who's told me that they're right. But it wasn't created by the weight, because I was an ideal weight when I got sick. It's the same with anxiety. Yet, do I have days I'm anxious? Do I have days when I'm down? Yeah, I do. But that's because I'm sick. It didn't start any of these things. I'm not a great one for positive thinking. I'm more the sort of bitter cynicism route, you know, and black humor. But that's what helps me. So it's the same when people are sort of, but I do believe, and there's very good science on it, that thinking things are possible, you know, thinking you can achieve things, it all helps. But again, I didn't get sick because I was a cynic. You know, I managed to live 40 years as a cynic and I never got sick. So you have to start these new ways of thinking of it. And I'm finding the new, very good idea of mindfulness is something that seems to be used as a stick to beat us with now. And like, I keep being asked, have I practiced mindfulness? I have. It didn't come naturally to me. No, the cynic part of me. It took me ages to find a voice that didn't annoy me. I went through, you wouldn't believe the amount of YouTubes, you know? Hands up, that says more about me as a person than the quality of the mindfulness videos out there. But I did find it worked. But again, I'm not sick because I don't practice mindfulness every day. So I think we need this new way of thinking. Other people have talked about training. I think the research from the healthcare professionals said that as well. People have talked a lot today about public-patient involvement in research. The integrated care and the clinical care pathways, that we don't go through this maze, that we don't have to go everywhere, that we actually do have multidisciplinary trees, centres of excellence, and then recognition, I think, is what we need as well. And what I talked before about the appropriate assessments of fatigue and pain. So thank you very much.